Good evening. My name is Jane Iwamura, and I'm assistant professor in religion and American studies and ethnicity. And on behalf of myself and Diane Winston, night chair in media and religion, I would like to welcome all of you to the second installment of Live from LA, Good, God, and Evil. Tonight, we will be taking a journey into the heart of television darkness and exploring the issue of institutional evil and personal responsibility. Before we get started, though, I would like to introduce Ernest Wilson, Dean of the Annenberg School of Communication, and Walter Annenberg Chair in Communication, who will say a few words to open the event.
Thank you, Professor. I want to welcome, first of all, good evening. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Okay, that's better. I want to make sure you're all there and listening. I'll speak well. Can everyone hear? I do want to welcome you here to this event at the Annenberg School for Communication, which, as you know, this event falls under the Vision and Voices initiative, which is one of the very exciting things that we do here at the University of Southern California, and it brings disparate groups together to share their vision and to share their voices. This program reflects, I think, the Annenberg School's efforts to bring together tough national and international issues and look at the way in which they intersect with the media and with journalism. And one couldn't imagine a tougher and more important set of issues than the ones that this distinguished panel will talk about this evening. Often religion gets short shrift in the academy. There are, of course, schools of religion, but the extent to which religion is viewed seriously in other schools and other areas should be a cause of some concern, and it makes us especially proud to have Diane Winston, who is the night chair of journalism and religion here at the Annenberg School for Communication. And it's really her leadership and her vision that has made this evening possible. In fact, if she is Ms. Diane, I would like her just to stand up in the front row. I'm just going to say one more couple quick things. One is I would also like to thank the Center for Religion and Civic Culture, which is one of our other supporters here for the good work that they do. All of us probably remember where we were on 9/11. And that's something we will probably tell our children and our grandchildren. I was at a meeting with some people from the Pentagon and other government agencies in the private sector, and we could look out of the window in the hotel we were meeting in and see smoke coming up, and said, my goodness, that seems to be where the Pentagon is located. I then had to get in my car and drive back home through suburban Virginia and into suburban Washington, D.C. Roads were jammed. People in the cars were looking absolutely hysterical. No one knew if the White House was being hit. The Pentagon was being hit. There was a rumor that the Capitol was going to be blown up by an airplane. So I think all of us have stories like that to tell, and it was very, very scary. And I don't think we knew at the time how much it would influence the subsequent national debate over issues of national security, of the priorities for our country, domestic and international, how it would influence the media and the way in which we think about ourselves and other countries. It has also clearly emphasized the issue of morality and what is good and bad, and what can we do in the name of self-preservation, whether it's the way we treat our captives or the way we treat our own citizens. So I know these are the kinds of issues that concern Professor Winston, and she has already had a very interesting session on this earlier, and I know that this evening will be equally exciting, and the topics will be equally important And I want to, again, thank each and every one of you for coming to this great event. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Dean Wilson. I'd first of all like to thank our sponsors. Good, God, and Evil is made possible by a number of generous sponsors, but Diane and I would especially like to thank the Visions and Voices Arts and Humanities Initiative here at USC for their outstanding support. So let's begin. The prison, the hospital, the precinct station, the courtroom, the Oval Office. Here are institutions we rely upon every day. But seldom do we enter these institutional worlds to the degree that we become familiar with them on television. TV often highlights the extreme burdens, systemic meltdowns, and everyday corruptions that take place in these settings. As our eyes turn towards the small screen, we become wrapped up in how the characters respond, and these characters in turn become an opportunity to reflect upon our own response. In the age of 9/11, Katrina, and the economic meltdown, institutional evil seems awesome and overwhelming. But these crises have touched each one of us. How do we negotiate this moral terrain, and how does television help us do it? We'll explore some of these issues this evening. I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Elijah Siegler. Elijah is assistant professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the College of Charleston, where he teaches a variety of courses, including Asian religions in America, religion in film, and religions in China and Japan. He has written several times about religion and television, including pieces on cop shows of the 1990s and on the religious imagination of Tom Fontana. He has published a textbook called New Religious Movements, available through Prentice Hall, and is currently working on a book about globalized Taoism. The first half of the event will be a free-flowing discussion moderated by Elijah, and then the second half we will turn the mic over to all of you for questions. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Elijah.
Thank you very much, Dean. And to Diane, the two organizers of this great panel, and for inviting me here all the way from South Carolina, the heart of the red states. The concept of evil obviously has been getting a lot of play these days, certainly in the last 7 years, and more recently with the election, debate about the economic crisis and foreign policy. And I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room here today who thinks that the concept of evil, whether it is a personal or a social category, how we work against evil, where it resides, I think these concepts are discussed in much more profound and subtle terms on shows like The Wire, Oz, Homicide, The Sopranos, Mad Men, than on, let's say, presidential debates or the op-ed pieces of newspapers. That's just speaking personally, but I'm going to put it out there. All of us who watch series TV are affected, I think especially young people who may be thinking about joining the police force, joining the legal system, government, education system. How these are depicted on our shows may have an impact. And so with that in mind, let me introduce the panelists very, very briefly, not going into detail. They all have very extensive biographies, but you have that printed in front of you, most of you. And then we'll show a very short clip that Tom Fontana has provided, and that'll get us into the panel discussion. So going from my immediate left to the far left, not saying anything politically, that's just coincidence. Next to me is Chaplain Javier Storing, who is the co-director of the Office of Restorative Justice for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Since 1995, he's managed the largest Catholic detention ministry program in the nation, in juvenile halls and probation camps, and he oversees a ministry to victims of crimes, to families of the incarcerated, and a ministry to the formerly incarcerated. Sitting next to him is Amy Hollywood. Can I call you Doc Hollywood? The Elizabeth H. Monrad Professor of Christian Studies at Harvard Divinity School. She teaches the history of Christian thought, and she has written many books and articles about the intersection between mysticism, feminist theory, and psychoanalysis. And I also understand you're a big fan of The Wire. So, and sitting next to Professor Hollywood is Wendell Pierce, who you may recognize as the beloved cigar-chomping homicide detective William Bunk Moreland on all 5 seasons of The Wire. He's also a stage actor who's been active in his hometown of New Orleans in regional theater and on Broadway. He's also a film actor, and he's also a Tony-nominated producer. And finally, the reason that I'm here today in more ways than one is the writer, producer, and showrunner for such beloved TV shows as St. Elsewhere and Homicide. He's also the creator and writer or co-writer of all 56 episodes of the HBO series Oz, and also a playwright. And this is Tom Fontana. And so we're going to screen a very short clip, which I believe is taken from the very end of the very first episode of Tom's show Oz. And you can probably see about 5 different kinds of evil in 5 minutes on this show. So, all right, so let's roll that clip.
That bastard killed one of my patients. I came in, but it was too late already. He's a monster. You gotta do something. You gotta stop him.
Let me handle this, McMahon!
People kill to stay alive. That's as true in prison as out. But I'm wondering why in here we fight so hard to stay alive. A man gets sentenced to 100 years. He really thinks if he exercises, gets all buff, stays diesel, he's gonna walk out? A judge says life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Without the possibility. Lifers. At some point they realize they ain't going nowhere. I seen it happen. A calm comes in their eyes. It's like they figured out something that the rest of us are never gonna see. They're suddenly free in a whole other kind of way. They're ready to die. And maybe they do what they can to help that shit along.
All right, so let me throw the first question out to Tom then. 10 years ago, in an interview for the magazine Corrections Today, which is a great magazine, everyone should subscribe to that. It's a magazine for prison officials. You said that, I think I probably do believe in evil, but the idea scares the shit out of me. Has that changed in 10 years? And what kind of evil scares the shit out of you? Maybe you can refer to the 5 kinds of evil in this clip.
Well, I think my sense of evil has changed since September 11th. And I think it has only in the sense of that what crystallized for me about September 11th, and I was in Manhattan, and I actually was on top of a building, and I saw the second building fall with my own eyes, which I still think I saw as a movie. I can't in my head actually believe that I saw a building disappear. But be that as it may, what I really had to deal with was not, oh, these evil people did that. What I had to deal with, what was the ultimate effect of the evil on me. And what I came to was that God and fear do not belong in the same sentence. That you either believe in something or you're afraid. And I chose from that day forward to believe. Now, my belief is a fluctuating thing, but it is what protects me from what I see as evil in the world. So that has changed.
And then how do you choose to write about that?
Well, you know, for me, the whole writing about evil and God always has to come. The more obvious it is to me, the less interesting it is. If you can put it in the kind of texture of the characters' behavior as opposed to their words. So that's what I'm still doing that. I don't think the way I write it is different than I have before, but I think the kind, well, in the sense of that evil is a much more personal thing than institutional to me at this point.
That's what you've seen it more personal. Just to follow up, to throw it out to anyone else on the panel, for anyone else, how did 9/11 change the way that we could or that we should talk about good and evil on TV or in the public discourse?
Well, 9/11, for me, it wasn't as large of a paradigm shift. It was lifting the veil from the sort of rationalized evil that's sort of a constant all the time. And that sensibility for me came from the fact that I grew up in New Orleans, a very racist town. It's sort of conflicted, you know, like when you're dealing with any sort of evil, especially, you know, people would always say, well, you know, how was it growing up in New Orleans? How could you grow up there? You take it, I mean, it's a wonderful place. You know, in 1 minute, you know, I could be hanging with, you know, Mr. Jones, and, you know, all of a sudden he looks at me and goes, and rubs my head, you know, rub a little nigga head for luck. You know, and you go, wow. You know, as a kid, I always knew to be aware of that and conscious of that, because my parents said there are people out there who don't have your best interests at heart. And once they set that, you know, when they set that bar, I was always looking out for it. So what happens, I think, in moments of extreme evil, it's a reminder that people can rationalize some of the most criminal and evil things in the world, you know? And it makes you feel very conflicted, and there's that ambiguity throughout life of that evil, it raises its ugly head. I mean, I remember, I guess I am still Catholic. I'm trying to hang in there, right? I still go to church and everything. But I remember I was taught, you know, I grew up in the South, and so I was taught, listen, we go to church because we're trying to connect with God, and there's always that which is divine and that which is man-made. And if the priest said something that was out of line or racist or whatever, they see that's man talking. You know, as a little kid, I remember that. But then, and then immediately you would say, well, why are we here? You know, but it was like, because we're trying to connect with God. So remember, there's going to be that conflict. You know, they used to urinate on my grandmother from the choir loft in segregated Catholic churches, because the priest stood there and said nothing. I never went to the church around my house because when I was a child, my parents went there. My mother was actually pregnant with me, and went there, and she sat down, her favorite pew on the right, and they said, excuse me, I'm sorry, the Negro pews are in the back. You know, there's a Confederate flag still waving at the church in the French Quarter right now. And every time I go, I said, Father, you know, I have an issue with that. Oh, it's culture. I said, yeah, you know, and you know, the Nazis made some wonderful cars. But, and we don't wave their flag and say, oh, it's culture. I had a great BMW. So that whole conflict constantly is happening, you know, and 9/11 was that rude awakening of like, oh man, there's always that possibility of rationalizing some of the most evil, heinous things in the world.
I'd like to throw in another piece in that, obviously we were all shocked by the evil of 9/11, but also what came after 9/11 and our response to evil, and how, you know, many times, and even with 9/11, you know, how we glorify a violent response to an evil act, and how we went from being the friend to the rest of the world to the opposite of that, and very quickly. And you contrast that with what took place in the Amish country a couple of years ago with the mass murder of the girls there. And that wasn't a shock anymore. That evil event wasn't as much as a shock as the response of the Amish who said, we forgive the offender. That was harder for folks to believe. And so for me, 9/11 started as a very dark time that got darker when thinking about how we responded to it.
There was this little moment, right when it happened, in the couple weeks maybe after it happened, where the spotlight was trained on the victims and the first response people, and many of those who were killed, and there was this sense of, I mean, I have to be honest, I'm one of those people who's just learned to be proud of my country, sort of a little bit. So for me, 9/11 wasn't a giant, I mean, I was kind of like, wow, somebody finally did it. And I didn't know it would be, gee, a plane, who thought it would be like that? I have to say, I mean, it's a little cynical, but that's sort of how I felt. But I was also shocked, I was horrified. I knew people, you know, I went to school with people who were in the building, you know, it was like, it was close. But I was like a lot of people really fixated on the firefighters and the cops. And part of it's because of my people and what my background is, but part of it also is just because they were the ones who, a building's about to fall down and they ran up the steps, you know? And so there was that moment of a response to an act of incredible violence that was compassionate, that was human, that was shocked together, people sitting together, holding each other. I can remember being on the phone with a friend and just like silent, watching TV together, you know, city to city. We weren't in the same place. And then it became, but we've got to kill him, we've got to get him, it's a war, you know, we've got to hunt him down. And then it became us, i.e. the United States, enacting precisely the logic of imperialist violence that is what brought the act about, you know, in the I'm not saying the act was justified, I'm not saying that at all, but it was that image of what the United States was that is part of what brought the act about, and then we just went and are still playing it out in a hyper violent mode.
Let me shift gears a little bit. We've got two producers of television, two consumers/critics of television. And why, not just on television, but in theater?
I'd like to consider myself a critic.
Oh, you're right.
You guys are
Everybody's right. Why is, not just in TV, but in any media, evil is so often more interesting than good? And how does that affect, I mean, why do you think that is, and how does that affect sort of the real world when people are watching stories about evil and they like the evil characters?
You know, it's funny. When I was I did about 2 years of research on Oz, going to prisons all over the country, various levels of prisons. And the thing that I feel the most unhappy about the show is that I wanted to do a show about retribution and redemption. And I think I really got the retribution part now. and every time I got to the redemption part, it would start to get undramatic. It was not good television. Redemption only works like in the last 5 minutes of an episode. It's a hard thing unless you're, which I tried to do was to just grade it in over the years that the show was on. Certain characters had traveled and some were redeemed by the end. But what I wanted was, the thing that bothers me about most television is you'll see an episode of a show and somebody's got like an addiction, a drug addiction, let's say, or alcohol addiction. and in 43 minutes, that person is cured, figures out, okay, I'm over my addiction, and will never have the addiction again. And anybody who's ever dealt with people who have addictions know that it is not over in 43 minutes. It is a constant struggle for the rest of their lives. So what I tried to do with Oz was to have the constant struggle as opposed to the, well, he's redeemed, that guy's done. Because to me, redemption is an ongoing thing. It's not a singular event. It's a lifetime of motion. So to go back to what you were saying, I feel like the show should have done more redemptive stuff in a much more kind of clear way, as opposed to me doing it in this kind of what I hoped was nuanced, but probably was invisible.
I would challenge, I mean, I would both state the premise and then I'd maybe challenge it a little bit. And it was just when you said that I realized that, because thinking about the show like The Wire, and actually seeing Elsewhere, you know, it's such an important, formative show in my, in my consciousness in many ways.
There's not one person here who's old enough to remember saying I barely
except for
do.
me, yeah, I was gonna say, I remember it. But in The Wire, it's a lot of, I mean, some of the characters that I find most fascinating are precisely the ones who are decent, who are struggling to remain decent, remain good. I mean, I was just thinking about Ellis, you know, is one of my favorite characters, and the way that he's just constantly growing and trying to struggle and trying to be right, you know, and realizing what's against him and trying to be right.
And Sergeant Ellis, for those of you who may not remember,
thanks.
is because we had so many people.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
He was the sergeant who was trying to save Randy Wagstaff, the kid, whose mother's house was firebombed because they thought he was a snitch. He ultimately moved up in the police ranks.
Yeah, that's right. And so there were characters like that. There was a number of them, you know, among the police force who and the deacon. There was this very small kind of recurring part, right? The church deacon who.
Now that's very interesting that you brought up the deacon. I'm sure you know who the deacon was.
Yeah.
The deacon was played by this actor Melvin Williams, and the deacon brought the community together and got Cuddy out of jail and helped him start this boxing gym. Well, the actor playing him was Melvin Williams, who was the biggest heroin drug dealer in Baltimore in the 80s, and who Barksdale was based on. Our executive producer chased him on The Wire until he caught him, and when he incarcerated him, they became friends and stayed in touch. And decades later, when he got out, he put him on the show. They have a strange relationship.
I can imagine.
But it's reflective of the moral ambiguity that they were trying to touch on in The Wire, which is we have that within us. You know, there's that, you know, duality in our humanity. You know, that I think that's the thing that draws us to the evil characters on television, because wow, do I have that in myself? The reason we even go to theater or look at art or whatever is to reflect on who we are. I mean, it's the forum where we, you know, deal with who we are, where we've been, where we hope to be, what thoughts are to the individual. Art should be for the community as a whole. So when people see a character like Omar,
I love him.
besides just being fascinating, it's his moral ambiguity. Omar is this homosexual murderer of drug dealers. He has this code, though, of he never curses, he never kills on Sundays, you know, and
he doesn't kill civilians.
He doesn't kill civilians, and he only robs and kills drug dealers, which that was his religion to him. And for anyone to break that was such an affront. And I think we look at characters like that, and they really exemplify the moral ambiguity we have sometimes.
And actually, a good follow-up to that is, I think Bunk is generally considered by fans one of the most good characters on the show. How do you know? He really tries to do the right thing. How do you play him
when he's not too drunk?
How do you play him as good and yet keep him interesting? Which also
because he was flawed to no end. I mean, he was flawed to no end. He had, you know, he was a womanizer. He was married, adulterous. He was an alcoholic. He was a drunk. He was a poor father. A man with so many inadequacies, but the one thing he could hold on to was the fact that he was a good cop. He was a good investigator, and he wouldn't compromise that for anyone, even when his best friend, Jimmy McNulty, turns and does something he feels as though breaks his morality, and he said, although I love you, I will not go there. You know, I will not go there. And so what happens is you play, you know, conflict in drama, and the conflict for him was, although he's a good cop, that's the only thing that was really going right for him in his life.
And the thing that sets that up, and there's that scene in the first episode where your character and McNulty's are figuring out a murder, right? And it's like this, it's beautifully choreographed. It's like this dance where, you know, you're looking for the ballistics. I don't understand stuff, but you know what I mean? And it's these two guys like working together perfectly and in sync and smart, you know, and you see the whole thing, and and you can see how much they love each other, and you can see this beauty in what they do and how much they love what they do. And so then you find out as the season goes on that they're both complete, you know, excuse my language, you know, what I won't say what
Assholes.
I was thinking. Yeah. I was gonna say fuck us, but okay, you know. But it doesn't matter because you have that piece of them that's been established very early on, and it's that everything else plays off of. So again, I guess I'm arguing a little bit for the attraction of the good. You know, there's that moment of beauty of partnership, of love, of figuring something out that is what, I mean, McNulty, I would have lost, you know, I would have been done with, you know, 3 episodes in if it hadn't been for that opening.
Or something, right.
Yeah.
So there's that tension, the tension.
But the criticism of television, we have within, you know, our journeys too. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I wanted to quit The Wire.
Oh, yeah?
You know, of saying, am I contributing to the stereotypical view of young black men?
Yeah.
And you struggle, and then you say, you know, and ultimately I would come back, and actually one of the best years of The Wire was the 4th year dealing with school. And that's when I really wanted to quit, because I saw that year, and I didn't see it shot, because I had nothing to do with the kids, but at the rap party, it was like, Mr. Pierce, hi, I'm Joan Smith, and I played Zenobia, and I'm like, hey, how you doing? And then I saw her, and I was just like, oh my God, you know, she's this really out of control, dysfunctional child on television. The story is this brilliant girl who's just got a scholarship, the actress, playing that role. And then that's when I said, man, I need to quit this shit, you know? and then the only thing that kept me on was this, that while we had these negative images of young black men, you know, the mayor was black, the police officers were black, a multitude of the politicians were black, you know, the teachers were black. So those people who complained and still saw that, you know, they didn't see that they had some other role models there. And I said, but if you were drawn to only the drug dealer, imagine how difficult it must be for that 13-year-old kid. He doesn't see the lawyer or the doctor or the mayor. He sees, you know,
Marlo.
whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, I have my hoopty.
Javier, as someone who works in the criminal justice system, have you found an impact of media images on sort of the attraction of evil, the people you work with?
Well, you know, what came to mind when what you were just talking about, on Monday I went to court with a 16-year-old kid and his family. I accompanied to his sentencing. He was found guilty of attempted murder, premeditated attempted murder. And it was one of these very common cases where he just happened to be there. His homeboy pulled out a gun. He shot an enemy gang member in the butt. Thank God, you know, he wasn't seriously hurt. The victim walked out of the hospital the next day. The newspaper here in LA wants to do a story about kids receiving long sentences. So I invited this reporter to this sentencing because I knew how much this kid was going to get. The kid's lawyer goes before the judge and tells the lawyer, listen, he's 16 years old. He didn't hurt anybody. He has no prior felonies. The victim was not seriously hurt. And the judge, this very sweet lady, in a very sweet voice, she turns to David and she tells him, you wanted to act like an adult, I'm going to treat you like an adult. And she went on to give him 4 life sentences to be served consecutively. She actually read the sentence 25 to life plus life, 25 to life plus life. And I'm here with the reporter, you know, and the reporter has a chance to go into the back of the courtroom afterwards to talk with David. And she comes out, and I'm like, well, what did you guys talk about? And she tells me, well, I asked him if he regretted anything. And I asked him if, you know, what could he have done differently so he wouldn't end up in this situation. She didn't ask the 16-year-old boy, you know, how does this feel to be impacted by this injustice? They've started this story, and it's so hard to get him off the story of the gang, you know, and what the gang has done, and have you shot other kids? And because it's so hard to get to the human aspect of seeing this kid as a 16-year-old kid and caring about him. And it just reminded me, you know, when you said, you know, is the media contributing towards a certain, it's really hard. A few years ago when I was working again with the LA Times and about horrible conditions of confinement in the jail for minors, you know, they were locked up 23.5 hours a day, horrible conditions. I met with the editors like for 6 months, and they kept on telling me, it's not interesting enough, it's not interesting enough. It wasn't until they found 2 kids hanging from sheets in the cells that they said, okay, now there's a story.
Sounds like the 5th season of The Wire.
Yeah. You know, it's the thing that I kind of went back and forth. The first thing I remembered was we should never lose the ability to be offended. So I would always welcome people who came up to me and say, you know, I don't like your show. I think it's contributing to the problem, you know, and how could you be on that show? And I said, you know, I'd tell them about my own personal struggle. And I said that I hope that our depictions weren't arbitrary, that there was some meaning to it. And then something happened that really helped me to stay on the show, which is some police officers came to the set and said, we actually have a real wire. And it's real funny because when the show comes on Sundays, it goes, you know, nothing's happening. We get stuff like people pick up the phone and say, man, didn't I tell you don't ever call me when the wire is on? You know? It's like the best compliment for you. And he said, something happened the other day that was really strange. The kids were talking, we had them on the wire. He said, man, I was looking at that show last night. He said, we look like that? I was like, wow, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I needed to hear that. That actually, this kid actually was reflecting on what he might be putting out there and how they were doing it. So that helps with that tug of war within me.
Let me ask the whole panel about the location of evil on television. The Wire is kind of famous for showing how the system breaks down. The police system, the legal system, the school system, the Fourth Estate. It kind of fails. So very subtle critique of systemic evil. Do you think that would have a negative effect possibly on discouraging people from entering those systems to try to change them? Because they think, well, if you try to change them, you know, these ideas always get crushed. All the good ideas in The Wire seem to come to naught at the end. And then on your shows, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I always find there's a kind of a subtle, I mean, St. Elsewhere and the prison and the homicide unit in Baltimore, they're necessary but flawed. They're not, you know, I think there's a subtler distinction. I wonder if you could then comment on the role of institutions in depicting evil in these shows.
I thought you were going to say the location was Baltimore.
Yeah, source of everything evil.
Yeah.
It's all Baltimore's fault. So some people like to think.
I mean, one of the things questions I had, just to backing up on that, is about, you know, the question of systemic evil, which is the way this was posed, and thinking about The Wire and Oz in particular, and saying, well, there's systems that are clearly represented as corrupt, so corrupt that we may not be able to get them going again, right? But then I wonder if there's also a way in which there's systems that are seen as just in and of themselves evil and incapable of perpetrating anything other than evil. And I don't know, I mean, because I think about Oz, is there any way?
I will say this, I think, you know, as you said, the institutions themselves are necessary, the ones that I've written about, hospitals and prisons to a lesser extent.
So that's one of them.
I don't think, I mean, I say this with absolutely no knowledge, In my experience, the people who become doctors and nurses because that's who they are. And people become cops because that's who they are. And so I don't see a show like The Wire or Oz or having people go like, no, I'm not going to do that. Because there is a kind of personality that becomes a guy who becomes a television writer is a very specific kind of personality. We're not, so I don't think those instincts are going to change. I know a lot of firefighters, and it's genetic for them. They can't do anything else. A friend of mine just retired as a firefighter, and he's desolate. All he wants to do is run into burning buildings. He misses it because he loved helping people and the adrenaline of being involved in a fire. And so I don't know. My instinct is that we become who we are supposed to be in some.
But I'm having a flashback to a St. Elsewhere's story arc there, where the firefighters get caught in the building and are very badly burned, and there's one guy who becomes a junkie, right, in the hospital, and it's because he's so scared, and he's a firefighter because his father and his grandfather, and it's like, it's in his genes in a not so good way. And so, one of the things I wonder about that, especially with cops and firefighters and prison workers, it's often not a choice, right? It's your family, or it's the only job you can get. The only person I know who works in the prison system, it's like all you can do. You know what I mean?
In the prison system, that is, I think, is true.
Okay.
There are correctional officers who just want to do it. But in a lot of these towns, it is the company town. Yeah. The company, the business in the town. But I think I really, in terms of New York firefighters and New York cops, I think they just have to do it. It isn't because,
there's a family biz.
No, but it's also, there is a kind of, like I said, there's like a genetic need to with a lot
I
of
don't believe in genetic needs. But
anyway. There's vocations, there's stuff that people are called to.
Yeah,
okay, semantics then. Yeah. Genetic need is a vocation.
I don't know. There's something about the the Irish American firefighter cop. That's this kind of stereotype that is real. It's passed down generation to generation, and it's incredibly fraught. It's not a happy place.
Well, what happens is it allows for drama because there are some people who say, well, actually, I have an impulse to do something else. So the conflict is what my impulse is and what's expected of me, which we all can identify with. And what happens is that's the thing that makes a good story.
Drama story, yeah.
Appealing to people is the fact that although it may be about that firefighter who is expected to go into that field, but he wants to do something else, I'm sure a lot of the students in here can tell you about, especially if they're actors. That time when you tell your parent, I want to be an actor. My father's reaction, I can't say in here. But, I think it's also a great opportunity on television when you see the reality of how things can be. Most of the cops who stop me say, this is the first time people really see the bureaucracy in police work. And then I also thought it was a great opportunity, and I hope that I got that out there, of why certain black men became cops. Because in our community, you go, man,
Right.
I feel like, you are occupying force, and now you're here. But then you realize most of these guys came from that very neighborhood, and they said, that's not our neighborhood. That was the relationship that I had with Omar on the show.
Yeah.
That I told David about and all that I really wanted to explore, which is, here you have these two men, one is a killer, one is a cop. They went to the same high school, and he said, you remember what this neighborhood was like, and you don't define it that way. And that's why a lot of black men became cops. It's like, because they don't define this neighborhood. That's not the neighborhood I knew, and it manifests itself different ways on The Wire. When Bunny said, hey, something? Y'all gonna run drugs, y'all gonna sling, just put it all over here. And let Miss Ann and let Miss so-and-so and Miss Johnson, let us just have our neighborhood back. Mine was, stop the killing or I'm gonna take care of you. And actually that story that I told Omar about, hey man, there was a time where even the thugs knew their place. You know, because they used to call me schoolboy. If I was at a party that I wasn't supposed to be, they would say, schoolboy, you're not supposed to be in here. You're going to make something out of your life. That was a true story. That was my girlfriend's father in segregated Oklahoma, where he always said to me, you know, there was something that we lost when we had that community. We had to protect ourselves. And so he went to a party and they said, schoolboy, you don't belong in here. You know, you got to get out. So I think it's an opportunity to show why it's worthy to go into those different fields if you show the reality of how dysfunctional they can be.
I think another piece to the question of institutional corruption, and in particular in the criminal justice system, is that certain corruption is acceptable to society in general because they view those that are directly impacted by the criminal justice system as evil, inhumane, less than. And so if, you know, you are going to have the guards beating on them, well, you know, who really cares? He's not like us. You know, and it's hard to talk about this issue and just look at a couple of shows without looking at the broader perspective of the media as well. Because, I mean, when you're watching the 5 o'clock news and you hear young black male, what do you think this story is going to be about? You know, so it's already become such our youth of color have been so dehumanized that I think that some of this corruption that we talk about is acceptable. It doesn't really affect us, you know.
Yeah, because there are people that make money from, you know, from this incarceration, you know, from this high rates. I mean, in Louisiana, you literally, I mean, it's modern day slavery.
Yeah.
You know, in parishes, you can call the local parish and say, send 2 over to cut my grass, and you pay $1 an hour. You know, you can get any work done. Every Louisiana citizen has a right to call the local jail and have them send over someone to work for them. You know, and Angola is a modern day plantation. You know, so it's there are people who benefit from keeping this underclass.
Well, and it's one of the reasons, I mean, you're right, it's semantics, but it's one of the reasons the language of genetics, even as a metaphor, bothers me, because it's that idea that somehow there's people born to, you know. And I know that's not what you meant. No, and that's what I'm saying. Yeah. No, but I was laughing at myself for like jumping on that because it is, in the sense of vocation.
Because I'm not a scientist. I don't
exactly. But there's a sense that people kind of, you know, want to believe that there's a group, there's an underclass, there's people of color, there's a group that only can do this thing.
But I'm talking about the individual person's like going, that is what I want to do. You know, I mean, we have a thing in show business where when somebody who's starting out comes to you, you say to them, if you can do anything else, do it, because it's a miserable life. It's a really miserable life unless you're lucky enough to reach a point where it's not a miserable life. But to get to that get to that point, it's a miserable time. I mean, I spent years in New York. I talk about my father. I said to my father, I'm going to move to New York and be a playwright. And his response was, what's a playwright? Just give you an idea of the household I came from and getting out of the genetic pool.
Exactly.
But the point is that if you can do something else, and what I'm saying about the firefighters that I know in New York, they're not all Irish guys.
I know.
In fact, since September 11th, most of that whole group has retired, and it's a whole group of just young men and women who. But they are doing it because a friend of mine just became an emergency medical technician, and he's up in the South Bronx every night, and he's just doing it because he really cares.
Let's take audience questions now. We've got 2 mics there, and I'll just kind of alternate, and you can line up behind them. And I'm going to ask, because this is an event sponsored by USC, you can get up now if you have a question. Thinking of anything for any or all of the panelists. Don't be shy. If not, I got plenty more, but you guys, give you guys a chance. And because this is an event sponsored by USC, especially encourage USC students to ask questions, get first priority. And just keep your questions short, to the point. Yes, sir.
The question, you're throwing out the word evil out there. This was a problem with a conference on gangs. You just kind of throw out the gangs out there without defining it. Can you define evil, what it means to each one of you?
Restaurant.
We did a whole bunch of episodes of Homicide where
Let me repeat the question. He said, can each of the panelists actually define what evil means? Because it's just a word that I sort of threw out there without defining it. It can mean lots of different things. So how do you define it?
we did a series of episodes on Homicide about a serial killer who was killing young Catholic women specifically and putting them in a dumpster. And it was all about what is evil, and the whole point of the bunch of episodes was to try to define evil, and I still don't know. I don't know I don't know what I think evil is. I just know every once in a while I go, okay, that's evil. You know, I don't have it's a gut reaction to it as opposed to a philosophical, I guess, definition.
I would say the same. I don't have a definition for evil, but I know it when I see it. And I know it when I hear it. Off with his head, kill him. Mm-hmm. Kill him, off with his head. I was just like, wow. I thought I saw that in a Lenny Riefenstahl movie. I thought,
he's a terrorist.
No, but this is actually a CNN report. You know, I know it when I see it. And I mean that. I mean, those rallies last week were evil. That was evil, and to, what's the saying? I'm forgetting it now. To stand silent in the presence of evil is just as, complicit in it. So I don't have a definition for it, but I think we all have a visceral reaction and understand it, and it's a very organic. But it's a dangerous thing. That's about that moral ambiguity I keep coming back to, because people can rationalize behavior that is so abhorrent. But even then, I think they know it. Even then, there was a wonderful exhibit, not wonderful, a fascinating exhibit going around with the photographs from lynchings. And, and everyone would be looking, into the camera, we're here, and they're smiling and joking, and, but everyone there knew that they were in the presence of an evil act, and there was one that hit me in particular. The gentleman standing there nude, ripped to shreds, about to die, and he's looking in the camera almost saying, yes, mark this, and for those of you in the future seeing this, remember these faces and that evilness. I tell people, I'm from the South, everybody goes, oh man, this revolution is changing, everything, I was like, man, all those folks that were, trying to kill Ruby Bridges in New Orleans were going to nursery school. They still around. Ruby's 44. 45. My parents were there. They're still alive. And so you remember that, and then people can rationalize it. There are things said in Louisiana, especially as I've been home a lot. We have and it's passed on. It's dangerous. And to use the media, to just even put it out there in the media is dangerous. If you notice, whenever there's a military coup, they always go for the radio station and the TV station first. Rwanda started from a radio show. Kill the cockroaches. So, you know it when you see it and hear it.
Amy? How about from your position as a theologian?
Yeah,
or as a scholar,
I resonate with the things that have been said. But I also maybe heard something in the question that is something that that bothers me too. And that is, we have a tendency maybe to think about evil as an individual thing. It's somebody intends to do something that will do grievous harm to another or to another group. And so that the intention and the act, are what constitutes the evil. And I think, I don't want to undo the reality of that, although but the question is, what about those systems over which no individual has control, and those systems, racism in the United States, as something, a form of systematic deformation of the ways that we interact with each other in the United States through intense power and violence, and it's something, this is one of the things, this election cycle too. I'm not a racist. You know, it's like, well, you don't have to think you're racist to be behaving in racist ways and to be behaving in ways that are harmful and even violent against people of color. And so I think that we also need to think, and this is something I worry about TV not helping with, because TV, you know, is so focused on the character and the character's decisions and the interactions between characters, so it tends to be pretty individualizing. And you know, one of the interesting things about some of the shows we've been talking about is that they try to lift it up a little bit from the individual and show how they're working within systems that can bring about and put people in positions of enacting things that do grievous harm to others without their having full control over it, or perhaps intending that kind of horrible, you know, a grievous harm. That's the word that keeps coming into my mind. When is grievous harm done to another? And it can happen because an individual wills it, and it can happen because of systems over which we have very little control as individuals.
Venture an answer? You can keep it short. You know?
It is a tough question. I'll try to keep, you know, and I was just thinking of this right now because I don't have a clear answer of what evil is. But maybe it has to do, an example of evil has to do with when we can get good people to rationalize things in a certain way that result in something evil. And an example, I know we could all agree that the Holocaust was one of the worst evils of our generation. I was in Berlin a couple of years ago, and I went with a group of juvenile justice practitioners to speak to juvenile justice practitioners in Berlin. And it was a conference that was being simultaneously translated, so everybody had their earphones on. When I said, in California, we give 14-year-olds life sentences. It's like everybody turned back to the translator and said, can you repeat that? Because they thought that she had made a mistake. So she asked me to repeat it, and I said, we give 14-year-olds life sentences. And they said, well, what does that mean? I said, that means that a 14-year-old kid comes to jail and will die in jail. He will never get out. That's what it means. And, you know, comments started. One person says, why don't you tell society, why don't you tell communities what these prisons are doing? Because they thought, you know, it must be something that's hidden behind walls that nobody knows about. And I said, no, our society voted for these laws. That's why we're able to do it. And then another person said, well, why don't you rally the churches around? Because I'm sure they're thinking, you know, moral people would not allow for this to happen. At the end of the conference, this lady stood up and said something very powerful. She said, I live in the country that committed the worst atrocities against humankind. And in some way, we learned from the United States that there is a chance for redemption. How sad that you're not willing to give your own children a second chance. So something that we accept so freely, you know, other countries look at us in the same way that we might look at another country where they might chop somebody's hand for stealing, and we say that's barbaric, that's evil. Other countries look at us and can't believe that we would allow this to happen to our children. So maybe that's an example.
Thank you. Oh, good question. How about this gentleman here?
Hi, this is a question for anyone. Getting back to the first question of the night, when you were talking about the sort of dark aftermath of 9/11, how it was interpreted and whatnot, how do you think the sort of sloganization of never forget has impacted how we view it today? That's about it.
Anybody? Not everyone has to answer every question.
Yeah.
I think personally.
I think it may be different for people who weren't there. All of that rolls off of me, you know. It doesn't affect me because I was there, and I just remember how horrible it was, and how it brought out the best in people in Manhattan. I mean, Tom could tell you that was the most amazing thing, the most hopeful thing in the world. As people, I was on 85th Street, and as people still miles away from it, walking by, and people having water. Where are you trying to get to? The Bronx? You're not going to make there tonight. You know, sit here for a while. Let me buy you dinner. And you know, it was that side, that part of the human spirit was just so much on display that day. I never will forget. You know, I never will forget. So. I hope the media and the sloganization of it doesn't belittle it and make it, you know, awful. People use it you know, to get agendas across. But I think if people remember the humanity, that'll survive it.
Last one, Greg?
I was thinking about the topic of institutional evil. We were talking about post 9/11 America. I'm interested in post Katrina America, and yeah, I remember Mr. Pierce seeing you in When the Levees Broke, and I saw Troubled Water this year, a very troubling documentary, and maybe just wondered.
Everyone has to see that movie. That's the best movie of the year. Trouble the Water. Post Katrina, New Orleans. First of all, I started thinking, is it me? You know, I was in New York for 9/11. I was in New Orleans for Katrina.
Wait a minute, you aren't doing it.
No, I flew down to Northridge after that in '92. So I think I'm done for that. But it is that duality that I was talking about before. It brought out it's the worst and the best in people. You know, if it wasn't for the outreach and the charity of regular American citizens, I would have given up hope on the country a long time ago. I mean, I would have given up hope after Katrina, you know, literally, because, you know, for every time that guns were drawn on citizens trying to get out of New Orleans, like it was in Gretna, when they walked across the bridge and the sheriff pulled the guns on them and shot in the air saying, "You will not come over here." People trying to leave, you know, this disaster. And in Trouble the Water, there's an incident that was urban myth. Here's the power of the media actually bringing truth out. There was urban myth that, oh yeah, you know, there was an incident at the Navy Yard that, you know, people talking about how, you know, these Marines and Navy sailors drew guns on citizens trying to go there for rescue. Well, in Trouble the Water, there's proof. You actually hear the guys talking about it. Yeah, they came here. I know the barracks are empty and it's room for 500, but we had to protect U.S. government property. And so what did you do? We locked and loaded and we drew down on them, you know. And which I actually think they should be court-martialed. You know, so it's the best of times and the worst of times. It's like that, you know, Dickensian
aspect.
It's that, and it's so infectious, that ugly part of the humanity that I actually was just awarded. I put a group together in Pontchartrain Park and was just awarded all the properties that were sold back to the government so we could redevelop them and sell them. We have negotiated, because there's money, federal money that's just been sitting there, that they will get up to like $80,000 worth of subsidy. We said we don't want it. We want all the subsidies on the buyer side to help people get back in homes. It's 3 years plus. And just the venom of hatred on the blogs. Yet again, Section 8 housing for all those poor people. That's the reason we're in. I just couldn't believe it. You know, I just couldn't understand it. Where this good story, something finally happening in New Orleans that I felt very proud to be a part of, had just instantaneously became ugly. So it's the best and the worst. But people, the poetic truth of it is, people are really, really good and have been so helpful in New Orleans. That's the reason I believe I know the city's gonna come back.
I mean, just quickly something on that. I mean, one of the things that is troubling me that I'm hearing, you know, now in this election cycle is the, you know, I don't want to pay taxes, I don't want to have to, you know, give anything, I don't want to spread the wealth around, whatever, all this kind of language is getting used. And the inability to recognize that literally the fabric of the country, that the levees, the roads, the things that protect us, you know, that we have to give something for them, and that, you know, those of us who have more will be asked more, you know, more will be asked of them, whatever that line is, you know, and so that there's a kind of reaching up to the heroism of certain moments when something really horrible happens, but the everydayness of what we have to do, you know, boring stuff like paying our taxes, so that the infrastructure of our country will be safe, so something like what happened with Katrina won't happen in the hugely. I mean, there would have been a storm, but it wouldn't, you know. And that's the stuff that people, I think, have a really hard time seeing, or I'm experiencing people as having a hard time seeing.
Fox News, not that I watch it, but I caught a little piece of it, was actually using that phrased by Barack as,
Yeah.
this is his big slip. This is where he really screwed up, where he said, let's spread the wealth.
Yeah.
He's a socialist.
Yes, sir.
I don't believe that evil is a thing all by itself. I think that it comes out of a very human aspect, and I think that great television blurs the line between what is good and what is evil. And I'm just wondering how you think your shows humanize what is generically thought of as nasty and vile. Specifically, shows like The Wire or The Sopranos, where, murderers and gangsters somehow are real people. And I'm just wondering what you think the effect of that is. Because there is some talk about, young black men and somehow this is what they are, but in reality it turns people who are thugs and gangsters into living, breathing individuals. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I will. One of the goals I had with Oz was to put a human face on the faceless prisoners in our system. What I tried to do was to think about who the HBO subscriber audience was, and say, okay, these are the cliches that they embrace about blacks, about Latinos, about gays, about whoever. And what I tried to do was say, okay, here's your cliche, here's your stereotype, and then start to flip it around so that the character became hopefully more human and less of the stereotype. And what I tried to do was to constantly force the audience to have to reevaluate. One of the things I did was Saeed, the character of Saeed, who was the leader of the Muslims, was the first Muslim regular character on a television show. And what I did was I went and read the Quran, and what I picked out was all of the things in the Quran that were the same as that are in the Bible. And so in the first season of the show, the only things he said, quotes from the Quran, were stuff that are in our Bible, in the Christian Bible. And so, because I wanted the audience to go, oh, wait a minute, why do I agree with him about that? He's a Muslim. So it's this weird thing when you're writing these characters that the audience is going to assume it's a prison show, so they're all bad. And one of the things I decided also is that everybody who was in the prison had committed a crime. I decided I wasn't going to do the wrongly convicted story, because that seemed the easiest place to go. So all of them were guilty, but then within the prison, they were being punished by the system and also by each other in a way that was completely over whatever crime they had committed that got them in there. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was my goal. I don't know.
I'm always curious when people always see acts of evil and then they say, well, why? Why do they do that? And then when there's any sort of investigation of that, they go, wait, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear the answer. We're just trying to say, well, how does a person go from here to here? I would just hope that, this is a hope for my show, that after the course of the 5 years, people personalized the show very much. They felt as though they were the only Wire fan. I know we had very few fans, but they felt like, and it would be like, some cat, I meet a cat up in Harlem, he's like, yo, man, nobody be checking out your show, but I be checking it out, and then I'd meet, someone with, largemouth lockjaws, and it's a very interesting show, showing the decay and dysfunction of the urban environment, and I thought that was curious that we had a wide array of fans. There's actually a site. My girlfriend showed what white people like.
The Wire.
The Wire's like number one. I was like, and then you go to, that'soghetto.com, and it's also there. So we.
Those are the two audiences.
Yeah, that's the two audiences. It was, and I thought, wow, that's a very special thing that they share and what they share is they want to investigate the why. These, I would hope that our fans are ones who say, I actually want to know the question. So if I ever pass that kid in that long white tee on the corner, you know, he has some humanity to me. And he's not just like, why do black kids wear big ass white t-shirts nowadays, you know? You know, it's like, you know, and so I hope that that's the thing. The only problem is on television, what Mr. Fontana does and what Mr. Simon did is a rarity. You know, so, you know, we all finished The Wire. We were very happy. We did it. You know, I'd rather be remembered for the rest of my life as Bunk. That's cool with me. You know, I'd rather Bunk than Gilligan. You know what I'm saying? So, sorry, Bob. You know, but you know, we would get scripts, man, and everyone. We still talk about this. I was talking to someone on the show, and it's like you go in auditions and you go, oh, you know, if I have to say, all right, everybody, listen up. All right, we got a robbery on 12th Street. It's just like, boy, yeah, man, we love what you did on The Wire. We love Bunk. It was one of the best cops ever. Could you read this? Yes. All right, man, why'd you do it? I was actually, I won't say the show, and I'll shut up. I talk too much. But I actually was talking to a friend. I was on the set. I said, man, this is such a hard show to do. He said, it doesn't seem. I said, man, I'm falling asleep in the middle of the fucking scene while I'm talking. It's so poorly written. You know, I wish I was back on The Wire. So I hope that humanity actually infected our audience.
It is interesting that shows would be seen as unique if somebody who is incarcerated or somebody who has committed a crime, that you show another side of them.
Yeah.
You know, because it's the label that society puts on them. I mean, somebody who's been in prison will be an ex-con for the rest of their life. You know, it's that type of thing.
Well, I mean, the reason I wanted to do Oz, there were two reasons I wanted to do Oz. One was because I remember when I was, I don't know how old I was, when Attica happened. And I remember thinking, oh, there's these riots, and I grew up in Buffalo, which was not that far from there. And I was like going like, what could they be rioting about? I mean, they're bad people. They are in prison. What this is like, and then the more it came out, and the more you realize, and then Rockefeller sent in the National Guard, and there were all these murders, and only within the last 10 or 15 years has the truth come out that the correctional officers who were killed by the National Guard. Anyway, that was part of it. But the other part of it was I grew up watching television, and at the end of all these shows, the bad guy goes to prison, and I go, yay, that's great. The bad guy went to prison. Whoa, I can go to bed tonight, right? And then I thought, and even while we were doing Homicide, I thought, wonder what happens to them when they go to prison. I mean, really what happens to them, as opposed to the justice is done, and that's the end of the story. That's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a whole other story. So I you know, that was the motivating thing about, was like, what really goes on, you know?
I can remember, I mean, this, I don't know if this is wrong, but I can remember when I was little, I'm watching Kojak with my brother, this very visceral memory, and Kojak's chasing a black kid down, who's probably 11 or 12, or looks that old to me, and he throws him against a fence and pulls him down, and I just remember that moment and thinking, how can this be on television? You know, and like this shock of like a little kid who for some reason, you know, just thought, God, how can that be? And this guy's the hero, and look what he's doing, and it's a kid, and you know, and I don't remember anything about what happened. Probably you don't know what you know, but it was just that visceral. And I do think, you know, there's a lot of TV where that's the moment. You know, that's the moment that people are waiting for.
And without the humanity,
there's nothing.
It's scary, because I was working on the Gregory Hines show one time, and I'll never forget. The CBS executive said, because Gregory would always come in, it was a sitcom, and kiss his kid. And he said in the meeting, he said, do black people kiss their kids?
Oh my God. Oh my
I mean, this
God.
was a CBS,
Oh
I mean,
my God.
so do black people kiss their kids?
Well, now you know what we have to put up with when we go.
I know those meetings.
I want to try to get to at least two more questions. So let's, let's have the student. You've been waiting for longer, I think.
Thanks. I'm actually
now, if you came over to this side, you'd be already.
That's right.
I actually kind of just want to ask a nerdy Wire question, but I'm going to try and connect it to
And
the
I'm gonna keep it short.
Okay. And it's mostly because my friends and I go back and forth about it, but it's really about what ends up being McNulty's final act as a policeman, and how evil is it or validated is it, and whether it's an all or nothing kind of thing. I just kind of wanted to get, and everybody who's familiar with the show, I just kind of wanted to hear what you guys thought about it.
What act did you say? What specifically?
The final act of basically creating a villain. And
in the
the whole
what he did in the fifth season.
Just
creating
that.
The homeless serial killer.
Yeah.
Well, he crossed the line. Yeah, I mean, he crossed the line. It was, and you know, it just, you should never allow your frustration to take you that far, you know, and actually change who you are and change your moral fiber.
My favorite. My favorite moment in that, though, is when he goes to Quantico, right? And they're profiling the serial killer, and he's just said, this will be nothing. And then they sit down and just give this like point-by-point description of him, and you watch his face, you know? And I mean, it's funny, but it's also a telling moment. It's like he's become this person that can be profiled and turned into a profile rather than a person. He's dehumanized himself by his own behavior. And his increasing drunkenness, and I don't know what it was, but he got so skeletally, you know, crazy looking. I guess it's called acting. I don't know, but
He's
you know.
also doing this cleansing thing. It's like, you could call it cleansing. You just didn't eat for a month.
Yeah, that's what it looked like. It looked like and it made him just look like a cipher. You know what I mean? Like
Also,
he wasn't.
we would party a lot too, so we were coming straight from the clubs, going to the sets.
Forget acting. I take that part back.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank the panelists for a great discussion. And I didn't really mean to grab the last word here. I don't know whether we have to end at 6:30. But the question was raised about a definition of evil, and I'd like to try a short one and see whether the panel could respond to this, which is, for me, as I've wrestled with this in my own work, and I get to ask this question a lot, how's this for a definition? The deliberate infliction of pain and suffering for reasons of profit, pleasure, political gain, or most troublingly, because we think that people deserve it. And if you think about it that way, there's one particular TV show that I've recently become kind of fascinated with, that I'm sort of like a bird looking into a snake's eyes. I'm watching Dexter. And Dexter is a really, really troubling example of this, because some of you may know Dexter is a serial killer who only kills serial killers. And he's such a nice guy. And he gets you involved in this, where it's like he does these bloody murders and clearly takes some pleasure in it. But he's a good guy, right? But really? Or yes or no? And I don't know. I mean, there's a whole thing here about victimage and the problem of victimage. It seems to me that evil comes into being when we project it onto other people, which allows us to act in ways that we normally would reject, but it's because other people embody evil, or we see them as that. It's sort of putting the shadow from inside of us onto somebody else, which then makes all kinds of horrific things possible. Still the panel?
Could be the argument for the death penalty.
But, I mean, I think that all sounds right in a lot of ways. The one thing I worry about, I was reading a book today by a philosopher, Richard Bernstein, on the evil post 9/11 and the discourse of evil in contemporary U.S. And he's very worried about the way it's used as a kind of slogan, as if, you know, and demonization of the other. A lot of things, but he was talking about Hannah Arendt, who you know, after the Holocaust. German Jewish philosopher, come to the United States, and she, when they caught one of the great, Nazi bureaucrats, Adolf Eichmann, and he was his trial in Jerusalem. She went to report the trial in Jerusalem and wrote this book called Eichmann in Jerusalem, for which she was, which caused a huge furor because she coined this phrase, the banality of evil, and her claim in the book is that Eichmann. It's precisely the dull, bureaucratized routinization, lack of intentionality to do grievous harm. It's precisely that makes him capable of doing such evil. So it was the routinization, the bureaucratization, the making it a machine through which people were put that made the show, made the Holocaust possible. And I think one of the things in Bernstein's book that was bothering me is that he's talking about the singularity of various moments, and I look at 19th and 20th century America and say we're doing this you know, we can learn much more from Rent than we're willing to learn, because we want to maintain the absolute singularity of that event. And it is every historical event is singular, and that was a singular moment of horrific evil. And yet the mechanisms by which regular people can get pulled into and participate in horrible acts of violence and systematic violence and, you know, poverty and all the things that we're talking about, incarceration, all the things we're talking about. You know, somebody has to go to prison for the rest of their life because I have a fear that my safety might, you know, there's a tiny, minute percentage point of possibility that my safety could be endangered. And I'm not willing to take that tiny risk in order to allow some kid to have a future. I mean, it's that kind of set of assessments that we routinely make all the time that seem to me to be a part of much of the harm that we live in.
I have one last.
Yeah.
I think evil is the indifference of us to others. I think that's the heart of it. It's not even necessarily hate.
Yeah, no,
it's the indifference that we each have for people who are not us, and so therefore we dismiss them, and through that dismissal of the humanity of others, bad things happen, I think.
But I ultimately believe that people know it. They see it and they go, man, it takes an effort for me to really, I should speak up about this and stop it. You know, it's so easy for us to allow our guardrails that would keep our moral fiber and direction going, to let them down. You know, because it's not me.
Yeah.
So I can let that happen over there. It's awful. It's probably something else that got him there. And my speaking out probably won't have an effect. So let me not do it. You know, and that feeds fuel to the fire.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's like when you think about that mechanism, you know, the machine that you were talking about, of routineness. You know, the machine was already working. I mean, in Southwest Africa, the Germans wiped out a whole tribe.
Yeah.
You know, and they said, "Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, we can do this.
We're gonna remember this one. Put this in the memory bank."
Yeah.
You know, and 5 years later, they did it in Europe. You know, so that's the scary thing about evil, how easy it is to slip into it, and how easy it is to go, "Oh, well, I'll stay indifferent."
Yeah. What's that quote about the only thing that needs to happen for evil to happen is for enough good people not to
say nothing.
Yeah.
To say nothing, something like that. Yeah.
That's so true.
All right. Well, I think it's about time to adjourn. So let's thank four incredible panelists. Some good questions from the audience. And let's give Jane the last word to close things out.
I'd like to thank Elijah and our esteemed panelists this evening, and to all of you for a deep and really compelling discussion. If you'd like to re-listen to this, or if you have friends that you'd like to share the event with, it will be podcast on the Nightshare website, so look for that. And for all of you who will be going to dinner afterwards, you can stay put, and we'll be heading over soon. Thank you very much.